All right, well, I have 2:02 Eastern Time, so welcome everyone. And this is our July edition of COSSA Headlines. I'm COSSA's Executive Director, Wendy Noss, and we're really happy that you're here with us today, especially given the critical topics that we'll be discussing with our guests in a few minutes. So thank you for joining. If this is your first time, this is a members only activity. And so if you are a member of one of these organizations, welcome. We're always looking to increase our reach and bring more organizations and universities into the COSSA family. So feel free to spread the word about COSSA, especially if you value the information that you see today from COSSA and from the experts we have with us. So I want to spend most of the time hearing from our friends at COGR, who will tell us lots of details on a lot of the things I know that you all are following: indirect costs and terminated grants and lawsuits and all of the things that we've been collectively struggling with for the last 6 months. Before I do that, because we may or may not be back in August. We're still trying to decide if we're going to do an August headlines. But we wanted to make sure we flagged just a couple of other items for you before we potentially disappear for a month. So just 4 very quick updates. First, you may have received an email from us on Friday putting out an analysis of the House and the Senate CJS appropriations bills. These are the bills that fund NSF, the Department of Justice, Census Bureau, and lots of other agencies. And so we have seen now the bills for the House and the Senate, and what, if their bills became law, what they would like to see the budgets be for these agencies. And if you review our analysis, which looks like this, you can see the wide discrepancy between the House and Senate where they are on funding for next year. Just taking NSF, for example, you have the president coming in at $3.9 billion, the House coming in at $7 billion, and the Senate coming in at $9 billion. So a lot of negotiating to be done here, but we did want you to have a look at our analysis because we go into the details of what these numbers actually mean and other directives that are included there. So you can find that on our website if you haven't seen that yet. The second item is last week, 14 Senate Republicans sent a letter to the White House Office of Management and Budget, specifically calling for OMB to release fiscal year or current year funding that's currently being held back at the NIH. This is really an important development. It really shows, as does our analysis of the appropriations bills, that there is still strong bipartisan support for science and the NIH in particular. And the fact that we had 14 Senate Republicans willing to be very vocal about their concerns about what the president is doing with respect to NIH is pretty incredible. And so there's a copy of that letter in the chat. If you are from Alaska, Alabama, Arkansas, Indiana, Kansas, Louisiana, Maine, North Carolina, South Carolina, or West Virginia, take a look at that letter and shoot off a thank you note to those offices, because this is really quite a limb that they went off on to support NIH. Third item I wanted to raise, we've reported on over the last couple of months that agency officials, so those working in federal agencies at NSF and EPA and NIH, have written to their leadership and to Congress, really raising concerns about what some of the impacts are and will be of the administration's actions related to terminated grants, adding sort of political review on top of grant review and things like that. So NSF employees are the latest to send a letter raising these concerns. Their letter is sent to Ranking Member Zoe Lofgren of the House Science Committee, so the top Democrat on the House Science Committee. And it raises several concerns and makes several requests for action. So this is the third agency who's come out. Maybe there are others, but that I know of that have come out really to buck their leadership and ask for help from others. And then finally, I just wanted to note that we're about to head out on August recess. We being we being Congress and a lot of DC folks. The House recessed early. You may have seen in the news last week, so they could avoid some tricky conversations in the House. The Senate has one more week, and so they this week are working on passing some more appropriations bills, getting as much done so when they come back in the fall, they're ready to move ahead. So what that means is August is a great time to take action. If your members of Congress are holding town halls or meetings, please consider attending those, asking a question. We have our Action Center, and we will be providing additional resources in the next week or two about particular things that you can do from home to advocate. You don't have to come to Washington in order to use your voice. So watch our Action Center and your email, because we will be sending additional alerts when Congress is back home, where you can interact with them more directly. All right. But why you're hopefully really here is to hear from our friends at COGR. If you've been around the DC land for a while, you know who COGR is. They're the experts on, I like to say, sort of the business of scientific research. So they understand the policies and the regulations, the ins and outs of the federal research enterprise. And instead of me struggling through all of the details, we asked them to come and share with us really open-ended what they see as the big challenges, the big issues before the research community right now. So we have three colleagues who are with us today, and I think I will turn things over to Crystal, who will tell you a little bit about COGR to start, since you may not realize what a tremendous resource they are. And then we'll get into some of the issues. So Crystal?
Yes, hello everyone. Good afternoon. Happy to be here today. And I'm just always so impressed as we do these presentations, what we call our COGR updates, but really being invited to do this by COSSA and by Wendy and all the tremendous work that all of our associations do in this space. I'm always really amazed, because to me it's a big community effort in advocating for the work that is so near and dear to all of our hearts in research, and keeping the U.S. Research enterprise as strong as possible. And so just want to say thank you for COSSA for inviting us to do this session here today. I'm joined today, I'm Crystal Toops, COGR's Director for Contracts and Grants Administration, and I'm joined today by my colleagues, Kristen West, the Director of Research Ethics and Compliance, and Cindy Hope, the Director for Costing and Financial Compliance. Go ahead and go to the next slide, please. So today we're going to cover a range of topics. I'll start with a brief overview about COGR, and then discuss some of the current key issues that we're following right now, highlighting really kind of the ones that we believe would be important for this group. And then Chris is going to cover the legal update. So she's going to provide an update for legal cases that impact research at our institutions. And then Cindy will discuss indirect costs and really the joint association group effort on the FAIR module in this space. And then we should hopefully have ample time for Q&A. And so definitely looking forward to discussions and questions that you guys may have. Next slide, please. So really quick, COGR, we are an organization of leading research institutions, and we aim to advance effective research policy. And that is to empower an unparalleled U.S. academic research system That's reflected, which is of course reflected in our mission statement that you see currently on this slide. We work to strengthen the engagement between academic research institutions and the federal government. And much of our work is focused on the impact of federal regulations and policies, as well as those practices for the performance of research conducted at our member institutions. So we really try to lend our expertise, and we consider ourselves the national authority on federal research policy and regulations. We've been around for quite some time, and bottom line, our goal is to advocate for effective and efficient research policies and regulations. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, we've been around for quite some time. We were established in 1948. We actually started off as part of NACUBA, which is another association, and we are a nonprofit organization. We are a member-driven organization, which of course that means that we work collectively across our members to advocate and research policy. We have 232 members currently, and they span across the 48 states, including DC. We have 88 private institutions and 144 public institutions, 24 affiliated academic hospitals and research institutions, 30 HSIs, 2 HBCUs, and 1 PBI. And collectively, our organizations make up a combined $54 billion of research expenditures, and this is in the 2023 HERD survey. So our goal is to provide essentially a unified voice across all of our individual representatives. So a lot of times are the folks that we're working with on a regular basis. They often make up primarily your sponsor projects offices, so like your sponsor research administrators, but we also have vice presidents for research. We, of course, have research compliance officers, general counsel, accounting and finance, government relations folks, compliance specialists, and the list goes on. So we have a really diverse community, really focusing on those areas that impacts the regulatory policy space for research at institutions. We do our work across our board and committee members. So we have 40, really over 45 institutions that are represented collectively. And they're highly engaged people, and they're really kind of the engine behind with what we do. And primarily, we, of course, advocate for effective and efficient research policies. And then we do this by coordinating across not only our members, but other associations, as well as the federal agencies, or even directly engaging with the administration. We, again, like I said, we provide our expertise. And so the way that we do that is you'll see, and I'll share a slide later throughout the presentation, we submit comment letters. We may do analysis or white papers of in-depth analysis on specific topics. And we, of course, we promote high standards and accountability in research and compliance practices. I will note that COGR, we're not a lobbying organization, so we do not lobby, but we do work with our colleagues who may lobby, and we do provide them the plus or minuses on perhaps proposed legislation that would impact research at our institutions. Next slide, please. So quickly, I'm going to get into some current issues here. And so I'll start off with really, these are kind of cross-cutting issues that's shared amongst our committee. So we do have 4 committees, and you have 3 of the COGR directors here today. And so one of the primary key issues that we've been tracking since 2025, January 2025, is around the administration transition, because we've seen so much activity in the policy space. And so one of the primary things that we do, and I'll dive deeper into each of these issues here in the next slide, is that we track the EOs. And so we do track the executive orders that impact federally sponsored research. And we also have conducted surveys. So like the terminations and assistance awards, I'll provide some results of our survey that we performed recently. We're also monitoring threats to FNA. So I'll discuss that here in a few minutes, as well as Defend the Spin, which is an initiative that's in response to a specific EO. And then we also track specific agency actions. And we've also more recently have did an analysis on actionable items for deregulation. And so we'll kind of dive into each one of these here. Next slide, please. So tracking our EOs. So we do have a really good table on our website, and it's essentially a listing of all the executive orders and the impacts to grants and contracts or research. And so essentially, we're, I guess, 6 months since some change into the new administration. And, there's been 174 executive orders. And we estimate that approximately 25% of them either have a significant impact to research at our institutions or somewhat of a moderate impact to our institutions. And these EOs, they touch everything from the gold standards of science to DEI, to the Department of Government Efficiency, foreign aid, and much more. And we've seen that through the activity of the agencies. And each of these EOs essentially is giving directives to the federal agencies, subsequently impacting the policy at the agencies. And so, for example, we'll talk a bit here about the Department of Government Efficiency EO, and then how now that's led to this Defend the Spin initiative that is essentially creating a lot of redundancy, not only for institutions, but also for researchers and as well as the agencies themselves. So this is a really great resource. So I always like to provide this in presentations. Next slide, please. So in the terminations and assistance awards, we of course have been tracking that since the start of the year. Unfortunately, we've seen an unprecedented number of termination of federal assistance awards, and I would say that we haven't seen nothing to this degree or level of terminations as applied by the agencies like this before. And many of these terminations are a result really of executive actions by the administration, again, tying to those EOs or specific priorities of the administration. They've been in everything from DEI to COVID-19, misinformation, disinformation that we saw in the NSF termination letters, foreign aid, and environmental justice. More recently, COGR, we surveyed our members on the impacts of the terminations, and nearly 100%, to no surprise, have received some sort of grant or contract termination for convenience. And if we also ask them who's the primary agencies that you're getting terminations from. NIH is the primary agency that folks are getting terminations, followed by NSF and USAID. And these are all institutional responses, not individual researcher responses. I do want to make that clear. But over 1/2 of the responders reported that the terminations encompass anywhere from 21 to over 50 grants. So you can think about that from an institutional perspective. And then almost 60% had said that the remaining balance on those projects were over $5 million collectively. And 85%, of responders had said that they appealed or they sought some kind of waiver or objected to the termination. So we are seeing a lot of activity from our community in that space, which is really important and key for our efforts. And 64% says that they've used some sort of institutional funding to continue the research supported by these terminated awards. And that may be somewhere bridge funding or trying to continue these efforts. And we've seen cases where projects were terminated and then reinstated by the agency. So this is like efforts to continue that sort of work. The most common appeal strategies that we found is that they're, providing justification on how the award supports the agency's priorities. They may be challenging the application of the termination, meaning like, sometimes there was keyword searches that were popping up for these terminations. Let's say the word diversity itself, it might be diversity in a species of animals or something. And so it wasn't diversity, equity, and inclusion related. So appealing from those sorts of things as well as what we've seen provided as a rationale for an appeal. And then, as I mentioned, many of these termination notices that folks are receiving, a lot of the letters say that it's no longer aligning with agency priorities. But we know, and we've provided have a number of comment letters and papers directly to the agencies because it conflicts with agency policies, their own policies and procedures on how to terminate projects. And so it's inconsistent with their own procedures as well as the terms of the agreements themselves. So we've subsequently have seen legal challenges to all of these, which Chris will talk about here in a few minutes. Next slide, please. So really quickly, I'm not going to spend too much time on this because Cindy's going to discuss this in greater detail here. But I did want to highlight that we are following threats to FNA. And so we've seen a number of agencies issue a policy on implementing an indirect cost cap of 15%. You can see the 4 agencies listed here: NIH, NSF, DOE, and DOD. And we know as a community that indirect cost is a critical place and it's a real cost to research. And so any sort of caps or limits on FNA can significantly impact the work that is supported at our institutions for research. And so this is a real significant issue for the community. And rightfully so, there's been legal challenges that we've seen from the community in this space. And like I said, both Chris and Cindy will dive into those here in a few more minutes. Next slide, please. So this is an animated slide. I love this slide, but I'm going to give a little bit more background. And so anyways, so Defend the Spend is essentially a result of an executive order around implementing DOGE cost efficiency initiative. In a nutshell, this executive order, it encompassed a number of things, but one of the things that it did mention is that to create essentially a requirement that for each expense item on a grant has to be justified. And so, and it states that the agencies are to provide this justification. And that's very important because it's really an agency obligation, but subsequently what we've seen is the agencies really pushing this on the granting community, on recipients. And so this slide essentially is an animation of all of the number of requests, and this is not all of them, this is just a small little portion of them, of the requests that we get in requesting this additional justification for essentially each expense item on a grant. And one may say, well, what's the big deal about this? People, want to know how the grant funds are being spent or what's encompassing in those grant funds. And those details are actually already available. So a lot of this information that we're providing is redundant and it's just inefficiency. And honestly, it's another way of stalling payments to institutions, and we're seeing that, so payments are getting delayed and there are overdue payments, and for a lot of these agencies as a result of Defend the Spend. Next slide, please. So what we've done recently is we provided this infographic to our community that essentially highlights the issue, the problem, as part of an advocacy effort. We have essentially identified that the resulting work of this, just over a 35-day period, is approximately 53,000 hours of redundant work. Again, that's not just for institutions, but it's also for researchers and it's also for the agencies. So this is all compounded. And it's really information that, is readily available for the agencies. And so we do provide 3 easy solutions in this, and we've encouraged our members to use this as an advocacy tool as they're having conversations with members to highlight this issue, because it really is just one of those places where there's quite a bit of redundancy here, and you have to ask the question of the benefit, if the benefit outweighs the burden here. And in this case, as you look through the paper, you'll see that we highlight the issues. Next slide, please. So really quick, because I'm running out of time, I'm looking at my time. So I'll talk really quickly about some agency-specific actions. I can't highlight all of them, but I will say I will discuss one, which is around the NIH foreign subawards. This is something that my committee's been following very actively. So we know that NIH recently in May issued a update to their policy on foreign subawards, and so we've been tracking this this essentially impact on the community in this space, and we've heard from several institutions, primarily the concern being that as of May, essentially if your project has a foreign subaward, it can no longer be nested within that prime award. And so NIH is essentially developing a new structure to unnest these projects. And that new structure is expected to be in place by September 30th, 2025. But in the meantime, they've essentially have kind of said, there's now these three options. They start out with three options. If you currently have a foreign subaward on a project, one option is to move that work domestically. The other option is to terminate the award, unfortunately. And and then the third option is to try to work with the program officer on some sort of new model for that foreign subaward. So we've heard things where if there's an option to change that to a vendor, but that may not always be the case for all of these activities. And then more recently, NIH have issued a fourth option, which is to do a supplement on these projects. And so if it's a human subject, if it involves human subjects work, then they will see about moving that particular segment and fund it as a supplement to the prime award. And more recently, they've issued some FAQs on their new structure, and we've of course been actively engaging with them in this space to understand more and to highlight community concerns in this space. Next slide, please. All right, so I like to highlight this in presentations because this is one that is used frequently in the community by folks. And one of, I would say, COGR's probably most popular charts that we have. We call our 1991 chart. And essentially, it represents the number of regulations since 1991 by year. And it's compounded on, the existing regulations. And so essentially, we've seen over the last 3 decades the number of regulations grow exponentially, with 62% of them being more so in this last 10 years. And so we do a lot of work, advocacy on, again, trying to have efficient and effective regulations. And unfortunately, what we've seen is more and more growth in the number of regulations and not the opposite, not the reduction of regulation. And so next slide, please. So more recently, we've done a white paper on actionable ideas for deregulation, which is essentially what are some areas looking at, COGR's advocacy, historical advocacy over the years, and places where our community believe that there can be some action on certain regulations to really reduce the number of regulations in these spaces. Next slide, please. And so really quick, these will be some quick slides. It's more so resources, but I talked about our 2025 administration transition page. This is our actual web page. Again, we feature a lot of things and we're always constantly updating it. So I wanted to provide it to this group as a resource. Next slide, please. There are several other issues, a lot of other issues that we're monitoring, but we can't cover them all quite in an hour. But this slide essentially highlight those other spaces we are involved in: research security, public access. There's a number of policies out there that we're monitoring in that space. Uniform guidance, the human subjects work, we have down there, further down, the gain of function. There's a lot of stuff going on in that space too. So just encourage folks, if you're interested to learn more about COGR's other key issues, go on our website. And we do have a COGR update that we provide periodically that does a really great, analysis of all of these issues that we're following. Next slide, please. And same thing like this is our most notable publications here more recently. Again, just more of a resource document. Next slide, please. Yeah, okay, there we go. Legal update for Chris.
Thanks, Crystal. I'm Chris West. I'm the Director for Research, Ethics, and Compliance at COGR. I'm also I'm an attorney, although I don't practice anymore until this year when I had to start reading cases every single day and keeping up with things and dusting off my civil procedure knowledge to keep track of all the litigation that's been going on. Next slide, please. So, as Crystal mentioned, there's been a lot of grant terminations and there have been rate caps imposed. And most of these activities have come out of a series of executive orders from the White House. And as a result, there's been tremendous amount of litigation by nonprofit groups, by universities, and by state attorney generals challenging the actions that were taken in these areas. I wanted to just identify some of the major themes that we've seen so far. First, in the area of grant terminations, there's a major jurisdictional question that is hanging out there that remains to be decided by the Supreme Court, and that will have a tremendous impact on how these cases advance or don't advance. And that issue is whether subject matter jurisdiction for these cases is in the district courts or is it in the U.S. Court of Claims? Why is that a big deal? If it's in the district court can impose wider remedies, and they can also certify classes of plaintiffs. And by doing that, they can have their remedies encompass a broad swath of institutions. In the Court of Claims, they're much more limited in the kind of remedies they can provide. And in essence, if it's required to go to the Court of Claims, it's one suit for a contract, plaintiff by plaintiff by plaintiff. And so things that you see now where you have associations going to represent all of their member institutions in a lawsuit, that cannot happen in the Court of Claims. So waiting for the Supreme Court to ultimately weigh in on that decision. Second big issue that the Supreme Court did weigh in on, and that has also affected this litigation. It used to be that district courts were able to issue nationwide preliminary injunctions. What does that mean? That means that even if your institution wasn't a plaintiff to the case, the court could fashion an injunction that prevented the government from implementing policies or implementing terminations or implementing rate caps nationwide, applying to everyone, whether or not they were a plaintiff to the case. The Supreme Court kind of put the kibosh on that a couple weeks ago and said courts are now, for the most part, limited to confining remedies to the plaintiffs in the case. So what we're seeing now as a result is that district courts, instead of issuing these nationwide injunctions that encompass all institutions, they're limiting their relief either in terms of judgments that they issue or injunctions that they issue to the plaintiffs in the case. And that could be plaintiffs like plaintiff universities or plaintiff nonprofit organizations, or it could be associations and their members. Third big theme is we've seen a lot of success in grant termination and rate cap cases at the district court level, federal district court level. But in many cases, judgments or injunctive relief that's imposed at the district court level has been stayed at the appellate court level while those cases go through the appeals process. What does that mean? That means that even if the district court said, hey, government, you need to turn those grants back on, the appellate court says, well, not so fast. You can wait to turn those grants on till we see how it all plays out on appeal. And finally, in the cases where plaintiffs have been successful in getting remedies and not having those remedies stayed by higher courts, the government has really slow rolled turning grants back on. And when they're required to file status reports with the court and you look at the status of their efforts, it's very slow. So those are the main things that we're going to see. Next slide, please. I'm going to talk about two different buckets of cases that I think are most relevant to the research arena. The first go to the 15% indirect cost cap. And as Crystal mentioned, DoD, NSF, DOE, and NIH have all implemented this rate cap. And in each of those cases, it has been successfully challenged by either states' attorney generals and or associations and their institutional members. Currently, all of these rate cap cases either have a final judgment entered that says government, you cannot impose this rate cap, or there's a preliminary injunction in place. For the most part, the remedies are limited to the plaintiffs in the case as opposed to nationwide injunctions. Now, the DoD rate cap preliminary injunction is in effect. We're expecting to have more on that case as it goes forward. On the NSF rate cap, there's been a summary judgment entered in one of the cases. The government has until August 20th to appeal it. It most likely will appeal it. There's also a state case filed against NSF as well. That case is ongoing. There hasn't been a final decision yet. For the DOE rate cap, the court has entered a judgment that has vacated that policy. The government has until August 30th to appeal. And then in the NIH rate cap cases, there were 3 cases there, 2 by associations and 1 by states' attorney generals. Those cases were consolidated. There's a final judgment. It is being appealed. Next slide, please. The next big bucket of cases, grant termination cases. And these kind of run the gamut. There's a lot of terminations that were because of DEI orders. And what does that mean? They're executive orders saying no more DEI. So anyone who had grants with inclusivity or diversity, equity, inclusion goals, or even just words in them, had their grants terminated. There was a case here, California versus Department of Education. That's the case that went to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court raised this issue of jurisdiction for these cases may belong in the Court of Claims as opposed to the district courts. And so that issue was not finally decided in that case, but it has come to play and been a major argument in other grant termination cases. And as mentioned, we're still hanging out, waiting for the Supreme Court to ultimately decide that issue. There's also grants that were terminated for other reasons. And one of the most common was that the grants no longer effectuate agency priorities. Many plaintiffs in these cases have been successful in getting either preliminary injunctions or final judgments that vacate these grant terminations. But as mentioned before, in a lot of these cases, the appellate courts have stayed this injunctive relief on appeal. So they're not making the government do anything right now until the appeal is decided. Couple cases to pay attention to: American Public Health Association versus NIH and Massachusetts versus RFK Jr. This is a consolidated case. There was a final judgment entered in this case that vacated the grant terminations with respect to the plaintiffs in the case, and that includes members of the associations that sued. The government asked the First Circuit Court of Appeals to stay that judgment pending appeal. The First Circuit wouldn't stay it, and so now the government's gone to the Supreme Court, so we're kind of on pins and needles waiting to see what will happen in there. Finally, as you know, there's been direct attacks against certain institutions, Harvard being one of them. We are waiting for the district court decision in two cases there concerning termination of all of Harvard's fundings. There's also a University of California system case that's very interesting. So remember, we talked about preliminary injunctions and how those can only apply to plaintiffs. One way around that is to have a class action certified. In the University of California system case, the court did just that. The plaintiffs brought class actions, the court certified classes, and that means they can have broader relief applied to them. Next slide, please. So what's COGR doing? We have a litigation tracker that's at this link here. We track these cases. I update this at least once a week, sometimes multiple times a week. The tracker links to Court Listener, which is a free site. You can go there and read all these cases. We also provide analysis as part of our COGR forums, COGR updates, and at our membership meetings. And that's COGR staff analysis and also analysis by outside counsel as well. And then finally, we've also filed amicus brief in select cases and joined with other associations to file these briefs to support institutions in their litigation efforts. And we filed briefs in 4 cases thus far. And with that, I'm going to wrap it up and turn it over to Cindy.
Thanks, Chris. I will go through this pretty quickly. If we could go ahead and go to the next slide. Yeah, first of all, I'll just point out that if you are not familiar with the Joint Association Group's FAIR model, there's a link at the bottom of the slide that will take you to lots and lots and lots of information. I highly recommend starting there. Maybe start with the summary. There's a 2-page summary there, and also a statement from the Joint Association Group about why this even exists. So those are good beginnings, and there's also a lot more information that's available, and as additional resources become available, those will be posted there too. But just quickly to let you know what it is, the group was formed in response to the attacks on reimbursement of indirect costs that Crystal and Chris have both talked about. 10 national organizations that represent universities and other nonprofit researchers got together and announced this initiative. They gathered SMEs, subject matter experts that broadly represent the field or the community, and they proposed models. And the term selected was financial accountability in research, or FAIR. Next slide, please. So why would we do this? We obviously have had some legal decisions that are currently blocking the caps. Well, as Chris mentioned, there have been some, that hasn't been 100% successful. Nothing is totally resolved yet. There's also the issue of the legal challenges are in large part based on mistakes that the administration made in implementing these caps. So there is a well-founded fear that if OMB decided, okay, we're going to do this the right way, that they could accomplish it and we would not win in court. So The idea, and there were discussions with Congress early on in this. We do have still have some champions there, but the message that we were getting is what we have done in the past, for example, in 2017, and where we just really buckled down and once again explained why what indirect costs are, why their reimbursement is important. That tactic was not going to work again. That there were too many misconceptions, not enough trust, that we really needed to come back to them with another way to do things that they could get behind. And that's what we have done and what they in turn are doing now. You may have seen language that has come out of committee reports, and we are hoping in appropriation language that would block OMB from unilaterally making changes to uniform guidance or to CFR 200 that would limit indirect cost. And instead, they should work with the community to review the FAIR model and other suggestions and come up with a reasonable plan. The model I want to emphasize is just a model. It isn't prescriptive, written in stone. You're not going to see anything come out of Congress that says, here are the steps you go through to determine what your fair reimbursement costs are. We don't really know yet what the non-negotiables will be in terms of the people that the leadership is of our associations are talking with to try to support our reimbursement, our fair reimbursement. But as things evolve, I expect that the model will tweak. It could potentially end up being merged with a model that we understand OMB is working on. A lot's to be determined. So the point there is, the JAG is continuing to receive feedback from the community and from the administration. So, your voice there's still a place for that, and we'd like to hear from you to make sure that the way whatever the model is gets implemented, takes everybody, all types of institutions into account. Next slide, please. So high level, the FAIR model proposes three categories of costs. Research performance costs are just the things that we currently consider direct costs, like salaries, benefits, supplies. Essential research performance support are things that we currently treat as indirect cost, but they could be direct charge to awards. There is a way to associate them with particular awards. Institutions of higher education have language into CFR 200 that blocks them from doing a lot of this kind of thing, and some of them aren't super easy to allocate directly, and a lot of that has to be worked out. But that category are typical indirects that could be allocated directly. General research operations are the expenses that we currently call indirect, that there just really isn't a practical way to allocate those costs directly. And the JAG has proposed through the FAIR model that we receive a flat 10% of total cost, of total project cost, not MTDC or direct cost of each grant to support those costs that can't practically be allocated on an award by award basis. Next slide, please. You should also be aware that there are two different approaches an institution could take under the FAIR model if it's implemented as proposed. Under the expanded model, all four categories of essential research performance support cost could be direct charged. But under the basic model, there's an option to only charge directly the regulatory compliance and award monitoring oversight and reporting cost, and then receive a flat 15% for research information services and essential research performance facilities. Next slide, please. A kind of side-by-side comparison example of the two models, looking at the different cost categories and how that would work is here. I know I've heard quite a few people, particularly who support pre-award, who are worried about the additional complications here. I think the math is doable. The SME team has developed an Excel spreadsheet that could be used as a template, but that isn't available yet. As I said, the details are still being tweaked. But I do know that in addition to just the math and the money, there are concerns about the additional complication at the time of budgeting to know, well, what would be the fee for research information support or the rate for facilities. How would we, calculate that? How would we know what applies to one project versus another? Aren't we increasing the number of arguments that we're going to have with the researcher, the PI, and with the program officers? And I don't disagree. I think that this, you have to keep in mind too, that this model wasn't developed to be simpler than the current model, but to address concerns that were heard by the associations that were leading to this proposal for a flat 15% indirect cost reimbursement. Next slide, please. So, in short, to receive anything greater than 10% of total cost for essential research performance support, an institution would have to develop recharge centers and or some other way, to demonstrate that they were more precisely allocating costs than we do now, which is, we just kind of accumulate all cost and then divide it all by the total research expenditures or modified total research expenditures. So, more precise cost allocation is challenging. So, in some institutions may decide that the base model is more practical for them, and I've heard from some institutions that they don't come out behind where they do now, because you also probably know that the institutions generally have much lower effective reimbursement rates than their negotiated rates. Let's just, yeah, a lot would have to be done here, for institutions to determine space surveys. Is that reasonable for them to continue if they have been doing those in the past? Again, please, your comments are welcome as the JAG is finalizing its model. Next slide, please. And again, here are some of the concerns that the JAG has heard. People understand, systems, policies and procedures, accounting, the culture. I mean, just the culture change, is going to be quite challenging. But when we think about everything we need to do on the institutional end to change a model, the federal agencies are equally going to be challenged, whatever a new model is. So, the part of the legislative approach has been, in addition to asking that OM be blocked from doing anything unilaterally, that they be given a minimum amount of time. Like you can't change anything in less than, for example, 2 years, to give not just the institutions, but also the agencies time to respond. And one last slide. Another thing, that we're aware of is that, there are concerns about the impact, especially on awards that have direct cost caps. If we're going to be direct charging some things that are normally in that indirect category, how does that impact, when faculty are accustomed to proposing 500,000 of direct cost, and that is all what, we would now consider a research performance cost. That's going to change the balance there. So that, there's a way to look at it, that it's all one big pie and we're just slicing it up differently. But certainly understand that that causes a lot of concerns, and especially when we hear that overall budgets for science may be decreasing. So more to come as the model continues to evolve through communications with administration and Congress, and also as the JAG receives feedback from you. So please do go to that link and read up on this model and provide your feedback. Thank you very much.
Thank you all so very much. We could have had a separate webinar on every single one of those topics and still not gotten through everything. We would love to hear from any of you who have questions. You can raise your virtual hand or just unmute yourselves. I'll start with one general one, which I guess is probably for Crystal or anybody, but given that this administration came into office talking about efficiency and eliminating waste, and so much of what you described in terms of COGR's work and recommendations in this way, I'm just curious, what has the administration's response been to COGR's comments and recommendations? Do they seem open to working, for example, on the fair recommendation? Do they are they open to what you COGR and the community thinks is efficient versus however they may be defining it?
Sure, I'm happy to maybe start with an answer, and I'll let Cindy chime in on perhaps more of the commentary around responsiveness to the FAIR model. I think from a general perspective, I would say that early on with the administration transition, communication, specifically with the agencies, I would say, there was a period of a lull there, and I think that that's not atypical when there's an administration transition. I think we probably experience a longer period of a gap of communication with the agencies, more so with this transition than previous ones. But we are starting to see communications with at least our agency colleagues and the agencies start to ramp back up again. But I do think that a lot of the actions that we've seen that come out from like the executive orders that's result in policy changes at the agencies. I think a shift there is, generally when agencies are implementing these policy changes, there's usually some sort of community or stakeholder engagement. And we've seen the opposite with this administration where it's, one day an EO comes out, a week later, there's a new policy change, and the community is, we're trying to catch up in a sense of trying to respond to the policy change. And so that to me is atypical. And, I hope that as time continues to go on, that a lot of our efforts that we spend around trying to engage with the administration, trying to continue. We've always seen it as a partnership with the federal agencies and with the government, so just to re-strengthen that, we do hope that we'll see improvements, but it has been, I would say, a more challenging space than usual. But I do think that, also with the administration, I know that there's an EO that they have, that they issued recently where, and correct me, one of Chris or Cindy, but it's like where for every 20 regulations, they have to eliminate 20 for every one. And they do have concerted effort to try to do deregulation. And so we hope that is an alignment that we specifically see, like with our advocacy that we do in this space, where there may be an opportunity here. So we do look forward to, engage with the administration on that effort. But I open it up to Cindy and to Chris to maybe chime in, and Cindy specifically about the responsiveness to the FAIR model.
So I will say OMB has been meeting with joint association group leadership and the subject matter expert team that they brought together. So that's a positive sign. I've heard it said that OMB has declared that we aren't worlds apart in what they're thinking from what this model proposes. Hard to know, what's going on behind the scenes there. Like Crystal said, we don't have you know, the OMB always had to be a little cautious about, you know, how much it disclosed, but way more so now. You know, don't always know what all they have that they, you know, that they have to keep in mind and consider when they're moving forward with anything.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. I mean, thank you for that. That's sort of what it looked like from where we sit, and trying to figure out, you know, are they really working in good faith to create efficiencies, and what does that mean? Or you know, is it going to be more, here's an executive order, now go do it sort of thing, going forward? So we are completely out of time and over time, but I want to thank all of you so much, and I'm sure our community will be in touch with you individually, because there's probably lots more to talk about. But keep up the good work. We couldn't we couldn't do any of this without COGR. So thank you all so very much, and thanks to our COSSA friends for joining us this month. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.